the Director of Officials, Steve Shaw. I hope you're doing well. It's good to see you again.
It's great to be back with you guys.
Absolutely. And today is sort of your day where you get a chance to walk the fans through what Radio Row and sort of your experience of media days. And it's that sign that unofficial start at college football is close.
It is, and it is unbelievable what this has really grown into. You know, my day to day, I started in the big room and did my little thing there, and then Chuck Dunlap kind of does my rotations, and there's kind of a prescribed in the morning. It's all the XM stuff and the all the different networks, and we do that. And then the afternoon is Radio Row, and but it's fun. When you kind of get all at, I can't say this, but upstairs you're very formal. When you get to Radio Row, you can let it go, and
right,
it's a lot of fun.
Well, let it go then.
Absolutely.
Let it go. And I want to make you feel real good, okay? Matter of fact, I've been scouting out Chuck for several hours, okay? I went up, and he said, well, he's rotating through the rooms. And then I went up, and one of the ladies said, no, he just made it to Radio Row. So I come running downstairs. First time I've run on an escalator, I was trying to get on the list because there's a lot of things that I want to talk to you about. Obviously, the coaches grab our attention, but let's talk about the upcoming changes. What is that number one change that you see as we're 53 days away will be the attention getter when we talk about rules and officiating for your crews?
Yeah, so I think the first thing we're going to see, there's some changes in instant replay this year, and most notably, the Rules Committee passed an experimental rule to allow collaborative replay from a central site. And so we are going to, we're in the process of building out the video center right now. We tested this in the spring, and it all worked technology-wise. So we're going to have 3 replay officials in our video center in Birmingham. And they'll have real-time links to communications and the real-time video to each of our stadiums. And so when we have a replay stop, the 3 officials in Birmingham will collaborate together and with our local replay official in the stadium and really work through the proper outcome. And 2 things we want to accomplish with that. Number 1 is consistency. If you have a targeting foul in the early game and you have a similar play in the late game, they need to be handled the same way. So we'll get that from that perspective. And really the second thing is that we want to avoid what I call incorrect outcomes. So those are the 2 things we're trying to do. What we're not going to get is perfection, because perfection's in the eye of the beholder. I've got great plays that I can put in front of our coaches, and they don't agree on them. So there are tough plays that aren't going to have full agreement. But, not having incorrect outcomes and being consistent, if we can accomplish that, this will be all worth it. And I think one final thing on it, is time of review. I mean, that we're not doing this for time, but we feel like we can do it and not extend the replay period. In fact, we may speed it up a little bit, but we'll just have to wait and see on that.
All right, one of the other conversations that we get into, we're a college football show. As I was telling you prior to going on, we're 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. Even in June and July, we got to talk college football because that's what Tuscaloosa expects. I mean, it never stops. We start our countdown to college football at like 245 days. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, the day after the Clemson game, Alabama fans start counting down to college football. I have taken numerous calls. I know I had you back on in the spring to talk about ineligible linemen downfield.
Right.
Rogers Redding, we've had him on a couple of times to talk about that, quote, we're now going to enforce it, right? We're not going to give that leeway. Talk about that process and how you're working through that to encourage, obviously, your officials, hey, we're not going to give that leeway. And I'm not even sure if you ever told them that we're not going to give that leeway, but Rogers Redding says, hey, we're going to hold their feet to the fire. We're not going to give that ineligible lineman downfield as we have in the past.
Yeah, so here, kind of walking through last season, because mid-season we made a mechanics change, not only in the SEC, but we went national with this mechanics change. And if you step back, traditionally the umpire has made the call for ineligible lineman downfield. Well, in traditional football, that worked drop back pass, but as you know, by rule, it is the lineman can go up to 3 yards, but it's measured when the pass is released, not during the pass. It's when you snapshot the field when it's released. Well, quarterback on the corner, umpire has no idea when it was released. Now, he'll know when that ball is downfield, and then he looks around and sees the lineman at 5 yards. Now he's got to determine, well, where was he when the ball was released? He had no idea. So one of the mechanics changes we made is now when the quarterback gets on the corner, the offside line of scrimmage official will help. He has secondary responsibility for ineligibles downfield. And so we did that the second half of the year, and we got much better at making that call. And what the rules committee is telling us is, 3 yards is 3 yards. Don't give them 4, don't give them 5. It's 3 yards. The difficulty is you have to frame it when that ball's released. But I think what we saw the latter part of last year was we got better with it, and I'm confident that we'll be much better this year as well.
What are the coaches' response to this?
Well, it's interesting. In season last year, I had dialogue with all coaches, but even some of those that were, kind of pushing the envelope on it, you could see, because we were getting better at it, they kind of changed instruction to their linemen. So now they have instructions that, hey, if this thing has a pass component potentially in it, don't go beyond 3 yards. So, it's the coaches on it as well. But I think we'll be much better, and with the kind of tighter restriction, I think we'll handle it pretty well.
Is it a reviewable call?
No, it is not. And that's one of the things that a number of coaches wanted to push on that. The Rules Committee talked about it. But, again, that goes into the judgment call. And we've opened up some judgment calls, but usually those are around player safety. So even after long debate, the Rules Committee said, nope, we're not going to open it up to reviewable. So it's more incumbent on our officials on the field to get this call.
Okay. Well, and it will be – there's a lot of teams that – their play will be affected. Let me ask you about tempo. Is that still part of the conversation in your responsibility? When you were down in Destin, a month and a week ago, was that still a part of the conversation, up tempo?
It is, but I'm going to tell you, one of the things, and we talk about innovation and officiating. People don't think about innovation, but we really, over the last few years, we've done a lot of things. And last year, one of the, I called it transformational things we did, we added an 8th official, the center judge, and that has helped us manage the tempo very, very well. We manage the substitution process better. We can officiate the game better with that 8th official. So really, I think we've got a pretty good handle on the pace. Now, there's still some coaches that like it and don't like it, and you're never going to stop that debate. But I think where we are today is based on the rules of the game now. If the offense substitutes, we give the defense the proper amount of time to match up. If they don't substitute and they want to go fast, they can go fast, but we can manage it now with that 8th official. So I got less complaints on pace last year than I did ever before, so I think we're really managing it well. Now, whether you like it in the game, what's a trend of the game is now we have games that have 180, 190. We've had a number of games last year that cracked 200 plays. But what makes college football, maybe this is what makes it so great, is then you have other games that have 150 plays in it. And the diversity in type of attacks that are out there, really challenge our officials, but make the game, interesting and different, as opposed to an NFL that, they don't all look alike because they have different athletes. But, generally it's very much alike. So much diversity in college football.
How much goes into it as far as when you look at the SEC? It's a financial sound conference. And I know there's a lot of other financial programs but there's some conferences that don't have the money and the resources the SEC. When you're sitting down at the national level and you're discussing rules, how much goes back to some of the teams that may not be able to enforce? I go back, and I'm not sure this would be in your area, but like iPads on the sidelines or in the press box. Those were talked about early on, but then they decided that, I don't know if that had something to do with finances, but it just, maybe a team that's in that lower tier of that 128 in a conference may not have the resources we do in the SEC. How does that go about when you talk about rule discussions and change?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and especially, you hit the nail on the head about technology. Technology is coming like a freight train in everything we do, including officiating, but now also in coaching. So the rule has always been, up until now, you couldn't use any technology for coaching purposes during the game. The Rules Committee passed to allow the coaches to use video in the coach's box and in the locker room. And that created a lot of stir about how do you make it even, how do you get it in every stadium, how do you do this? And so the Rules Committee kind of backed off and said, we're going to delay implementation of this rule until 2017. The other two things, some of the coaches want, iPads or video on the sideline. And then some, we talked about this in Destin also, want communication, helmet communication to your quarterback and signal caller on defense. So what we've really done, I think the Rules Committee has kind of opened the conversation for technology. And I think what's now happening is, how do we make this consistent, and where if you go on the road, you know what to expect, you can use your technology. How do we do that? So I think between now and the start of 2017, we're going to have a great debate on what coaches and players can use from a technology perspective. But it's coming. I mean, it is coming. It is just, how do we manage it? How do we make it consistent and fair for all the teams?
What was the hang-up on player-coach communication through the headset?
So you think of the NFL does it, so you say looks pretty straightforward. But the NFL sends two guys out that do the frequency work. I mean, and their stadiums, although they're amazing stadiums, I mean, when you go to many of our stadiums, there's a lot more fans. The pressure on the wireless networks is incredible. You probably experienced that. And so
we have no service, by the way, down in. No, I'm just kidding.
The reality is, how do you get it set up? How do you protect the frequencies? How do you ensure you do that? And for the NFL, 32 venues is a very doable thing. You think of college football, how do you protect that in every venue? And then there's always a cost component, but we've seen where now certain rules are, you can take advantage of them if you want to, but it's how do you ensure that both teams get that wireless frequencies, whatever it turns out to be. We've had to deal, I thought, I'm an officiating guy, right? We work on mechanics and evaluation of plays and that sort of thing. But no, I've had to learn, the 900 megahertz frequency range, because our crew communication system works in that. So does the coaches' headsets. And so we've had to make sure that in our stadiums that we have that little section of the bandwidth available, because we don't want somebody stepping on top of our officiating communication. So it's a very technical discussion in addition to, it sounds pretty easy. Let's just put microphones in their helmets, but it's got to work for both teams.
So, and now you just brought up something, because I always think about, what was it, Spygate, I think is what they called it with the New England Patriots.
Yep.
Do you have to, is that part of under your scope of responsibility? Do you have to monitor to make sure teams, we always think that they're perfect, right? But you're always trying to get the edge as parity closes the gap there in college football. Do you have to monitor that? Is that your scope to make sure that?
Well, it's really not in our scope, although sometimes the officiating component gets brought in, because if a coach complains about it, he's coming to us. But it's really, that's in the commissioner's regulations, and they're very specific regulations. And this is even in the NCAA rule book, that you can't use video. You can't video the opposing team's, signals. And so, it's one of those kind of integrity type expectations that, how we would know, I have no idea, but the integrity of the game expects that. And so, but it's really not an officiate. You're never going to see our referee throw a flag for, their camera pointed at another coach. We wouldn't deal with it, but we would kind of, from a game management perspective, deal with it afterwards.
Steve Shaw right now, the Director of Officials for the Southeastern Conference, as we finish up our conversation. All right, the number one complaint that I get from fans.
You get complaints?
Oh, listen, we have a sports complaint line.
We never get complaints.
You don't ever get phone calls?
Never.
I would love to check your voicemail on Monday.
Oh, my goodness. I can always tell how well our officials did. We have a receptionist at the SEC office, and we have a special little voicemail box, and they have to go through her to get to it. But when I walk in on Monday, she'll say, y'all had a good week this week. Only 128 voicemails. But if we didn't have such a good week, it's a lot more.
But that tells you, as coach, as far as the commissioner, he made it a motto. It means more. It does mean more here.
It does.
And the SEC,
we see that.
Oh, listen. I have a job because of college football. It's the way I pay the bills, right? Because of college football. When you look, how do you grade your officials? How do you make them accountable, the transparency? Obviously there's not a lot of transparency there, but I know you talk about rules, but how do you grade your officials?
So it's interesting because a lot of fans think, there is no accountability, but there is huge accountability. So we actually have, I wish I'd have brought my spreadsheet. We have 5 categories where we evaluate them. They get a film grade every week, and we average that. They have the observers force rank them in position, and we do a median score for that. And then obviously I get input into it. We have a test that they have to take that counts as a score. And then they also have a run time, their mile and a half, to show their physical conditioning. And so we combine all that together. And so there's not just one formula that says, multiply this one by 0.8 and this one by 0.1 and whatever. So I have some judgment in it, but there's high accountability. Every play in every game is graded by the official, just like when they were players. And so there's high accountability, and it's really twofold. One, they all want to work postseason. They're like the teams. I want to qualify for a bowl, and then once you qualify, I want the best bowl I can get. That's done off the evaluations. And then ultimately, whether they get invited back to officiate in the Southeastern Conference is a direct impact of that grading system. So high accountability. We don't go public with a lot of that. I don't want people to say, oh, this is the number 4 ranked referee for our game today. But
we may get there at some point.
But we may. And but it's important your fans know that there is that high accountability, and that people don't just say, we didn't really see that play. I assure you, we know it. Every play, from the grading perspective.
All right, I got 20 seconds. I'm getting the wrap-up sign. On the air, on the record, we're recording. We will call the ineligible lineman downfield this year.
We will officiate it right by the rule.
3 yards.
3 yards.